You walk out to your garden in the middle of July and you see it happening again. You notice the tomatoes stalling out exactly when they should be taking off. You see peppers that look exhausted, leaves that are yellowing at the edges, and you wonder what you did wrong. You bought the expensive compost, you set up the drip tape, you spent your weekends pulling weeds by hand because you don't believe in spraying chemicals. You did everything the books told you to do, but the results just feel heavy. It feels like a struggle when you look at your neighbor's plot or a wild patch of brambles in the woods. You see a vitality that you just can't seem to replicate in your raised beds. It is disheartening. It makes you feel like maybe you just don't have the instinct for this. I want you to take a breath and stop blaming yourself. You aren't failing. You are just operating with an incomplete map. We have been taught for 100 years that gardening is purely chemistry. We are told that if we add enough nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the plant has no choice but to grow. So we treat the soil like a mixing bowl. But soil isn't just a chemical sponge. It is a living, breathing environment that relies on signals to tell plants when to drink and how to grow. In our quest for perfect, tidy garden boxes, we have accidentally insulated our soil. We have cut it off from the subtle natural electrical charge that runs through the earth. We created a dead circuit. The plants are surviving on the food you give them, but they aren't thriving because the energy isn't flowing. You need to shift your perspective for a moment. Instead of looking at your soil as a dead medium that holds roots in place, I want you to see it for what it actually is. Your soil is a battery. Every handful of dirt is full of minerals, salts, and moisture. In the world of physics, that is called an electrolyte. It is the exact same stuff that is inside the car battery, sitting in your driveway, or the AA battery in your wall clock. The potential for energy is already sitting right there in your raised bed, waiting to be tapped. But right now, the switch is in the off position. We are going to flip it back on. This is not a new invention I came up with to get views. This is old, forgotten science. It is the same principle that Alessandro Volta discovered hundreds of years ago. When you place two different metals into a conductive medium like a lemon, a potato, or your wet garden soil, you create a movement of electrons. You create a current. Nature uses this current to stimulate growth, to signal roots where to go, and to help plants pull up nutrients. In the wild, this happens naturally through mineral veins and microbial networks. In our isolated garden boxes, we broke that connection. We are simply going to rebuild it using the most basic materials you can find at the hardware store. The system relies on the relationship between two specific metals, copper and zinc. You don't need fancy equipment. For the copper, simple copper wire or a piece of copper pipe works perfectly. For the zinc, we use galvanized steel, something like a galvanized nail or a tent stake. That coating on the steel is zinc. When you introduce these two distinct metals into your soil and connect them, you aren't just putting metal in the dirt. You are closing a circuit. You are allowing the natural acidity and moisture of your soil to interact with those metals, creating a very mild, continuous DC trickle charge. This isn't about electrocuting your plants. It is about waking them up. It is about creating the low-level hum of energy that signals to a seed that it is time to burst, or to a root system that it is safe to expand. It is gentle, it is constant, and it is the missing piece of the puzzle. It is time to build the engine. You don't need to order a specialized kit online, and you certainly don't need to hire an electrician. You can likely find everything you need in the back of your garage, or for a few dollars at the local hardware store. We are going to keep this grounded and mechanical. You need two main components. First, you need copper. I prefer using solid, unshielded copper wire, something like 10 or 12 gauge, the kind used for household grounding. If you have old copper pipe lying around, that works too. Second, you need zinc. The easiest source for this is a standard galvanized steel tent stake or a large galvanized nail. Galvanized just means it has been dipped in zinc, which is exactly what we need to create the chemical reaction. Walk out to your garden bed. We are going to set this up to work with the natural magnetic flow of the earth. So take a moment to figure out where north is. You are going to place your galvanized steel piece, your zinc, at the north end of the bed. Drive it into the soil so it is solid, leaving just the head or a small section exposed. Now go to the south end of the bed and place your copper. If you are using a pipe, hammer it in. If you are using wire, you can wind it around a wooden stick or simply bury a length of it along the southern edge. The distance doesn't need to be precise, but you want them on opposite ends to encourage the flow across the entire root zone. Now comes the critical part, closing the circuit. You need to connect that northern zinc stake to the southern copper piece. Run a length of your copper wire along the surface of the soil or bury it just an inch deep to keep it out of the way. Wrap one end tightly around the galvanized stake and the other around your copper piece. Make sure the connection is metal on metal. If your wire has plastic insulation, strip it back so you get good, clean contact. Once you twist that wire tight, the system is live. You won't hear a hum or see a spark. The voltage is incredibly low, usually under 1 volt. But you have just turned your passive box of dirt into an active energy field. You have created a path of least resistance for electrons to move, and your plants are sitting right in the middle of that stream. Now, I want you to walk through the year with me. Visualize your garden bed in early May. You have just put your tomato starts in the ground and sown your rows of beans. Usually, this is the time of anxiety. You watch the seedlings wilt a little in the sun. You worry about a late frost, and you wait for them to recover from transplant shock. But this year, with the copper and zinc circuit buried quietly beneath the mulch, the timeline shifts. You notice that the pouty phase, where plants just sit there doing nothing for a week, is shorter. The energy in the soil is stimulating the root tips immediately. Within 3 or 4 days, the leaves perk up and turn a deep dark green. They aren't struggling to find the soil. The soil is actively greeting them. Fast forward to mid-June. This is usually when the bugs show up. You walk out with your coffee, expecting to see aphids on the kale or hornworms on the tomatoes. But take a close look at the stems of your plants in the electrified bed. They are thicker than you are used to. They feel sturdy, almost woody near the base. This is what happens when a plant creates higher bricks, natural sugars, efficiently. A plant with high electrical conductivity moves minerals faster, building cell walls that are harder for pests to chew through. You might see a bug or two, but you don't see an infestation. The plant is broadcasting a signal of health, not distress. So the predators keep moving. By August, the difference is undeniable. In a standard bed, this is when plants start to look tired. The lower leaves get crusty and brown. The production slows down, and the heat beats them into submission. But look at the bed with the wire. The growth is still pushing upward. The flowering hasn't stopped. It feels like the plants have access to a reserve tank of stamina. You aren't seeing those giant, watery vegetables that rot in 2 days. You are seeing dense, heavy fruit that feels substantial in your hand. The yield isn't just more. It is consistent. While your neighbor is tearing out their burnt-up cucumber vines, yours are still putting out new blossoms. You haven't added extra fertilizer. You haven't changed your watering schedule. You simply kept the circuit closed, and the plants responded by finishing the race as strong as they started. The true test of a system isn't how it performs when the weather's perfect. Anyone can grow a decent zucchini when the rain falls gently and the temperatures stay in the 70s. The true test comes when the weather turns on you. We all know that feeling in late July or August when the heat dome settles over your region. The air feels heavy, the ground cracks, and the sun feels less like a friend and more like a weight pressing down on your garden. In a standard raised bed, this is when you see the fainting. You go out at noon and the squash leaves are flat against the dirt. You water them, but they just can't drink fast enough to keep up with the evaporation. They are surviving, but they are stressed, and stress invites disease. But walk over to the bed where you buried the copper and zinc. The difference is subtle at first, but then you see it. The leaves are holding their tension. They are upright. The plant isn't fainting because the electrical stimulation has encouraged a root system that goes deeper and drinks more efficiently. The connection to the Earth's natural current seems to help the plant regulate its internal water pressure. It is resilient. It doesn't need you to rescue it 3 times a day with a hose. It is tapping into a stability that goes deeper than the top 3 inches of mulch. This resilience buys you time on the other end of the season too. When the first frost warning comes in October, we usually panic. We run out with sheets and blankets trying to save what we can. But plants grown in an electrified system often develop a higher concentration of minerals and sugars in their sap. In simple terms, they have a better natural antifreeze. I have seen tomato plants in these beds shrug off a light frost that turned the unconnected plants in the next row black. I am not saying they are invincible. Winter eventually comes for everything. But this system buys you 2, maybe 3 extra weeks. That is 2 more weeks of fresh salsa, 2 more weeks of green beans. It turns a catastrophic weather event into a manageable annoyance. It gives you the peace of mind that your food supply isn't going to collapse just because the weatherman missed his forecast by 5 degrees. Ultimately, we don't garden just to save a few dollars on tomatoes. We garden because we want to know exactly what is going into our bodies. When you eat a vegetable grown in an energized bed, you are eating something that reached its full genetic potential. It tastes different. It is denser. It feels like real fuel. There is a quiet power in knowing that you did this without relying on a supply chain that stretches halfway around the world. You didn't need the imported fertilizer. You didn't need the chemical pest control. You just needed some wire, a few stakes, in the soil in your backyard. That is what independence looks like. It isn't a bunker. It is a dinner plate full of food that you grew with your own hands using a system that relies on physics, not purchases. I don't want you to go out and tear up your entire backyard tomorrow. That is how people get overwhelmed and quit. I want you to start small. Pick one raised bed, maybe just one row of peppers, go to the hardware store, spend the $5 on the wire and the stakes and set it up. Treat it as an experiment. Watch it compared to the rest of your garden. Let the results convince you, not me. If it works, expand it next year. If it doesn't feel right, you are only out a few minutes of time. But I have a feeling that once you see how the leaves hold themselves up to the sun, and once you taste that first harvest, you will understand. You will realize that you haven't just been growing food. You have been plugging back into the source. If this journey into the hidden electrical life of your garden has changed the way you look at the soil beneath your feet, please subscribe and like the channel. We are dedicated to uncovering the natural laws and forgotten sciences that have been buried by time. Let's grow a more resilient future together. The next piece of the puzzle will be revealed very soon.